Hi, I'm Vanessa with Ellie and Mac, and while it's bitterly cold here, it was 20 degrees this morning, -6 Fahrenheit. Other places are looking forward to spring break and warmer weather. So I wanted to take a moment and celebrate those of you who may be going on holiday soon. And I wanted to show you some other fabrics that can be kind of difficult. And so today we'll be talking about vintage fabrics as well as chiffon. Let's get started. So when I think of hot weather, not cold weather like today, I often think of breathable fabrics in either shirts or in skirts. I usually don't wear too many shorts. I just find that these dresses and skirts and shirts work for me. And I also like these breathable fabrics. So that's why I picked the fabrics today that would like to wear more during the summer. Sometimes I kind of get into that jersey knit cycle of that's all I have. So I wanted to bring in a little bit more wovens because they breathe so well. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm just more drawn to them. I'm also drawn to these vintage fabrics. I think a lot of us are. But one thing that's hard with the vintage fabrics is the musty smell. And how you overcome that is with a cup of vinegar with your regular laundry detergent. And you're just going to run a cycle. I usually do a permanent press cycle for them, and then I air dry them outside, sunny day, to help get rid of most of the musty smell. If it's really strong, you might want to bring them in at night and then take them out for a few days. You just don't want to have the sun start bleaching them, just a little bit. Now, it's really hard to get rid of the smell entirely. So make sure you don't fold them up and put them in a tote and slam the top down on them, or put them in a cardboard box. I usually have mine in like a wicker or in shelves to let them continue to breathe. And so after some time, the smell does lessen and you're able to use these and not walk around with the musty smell. It will also, if you cannot wait and you want to sew them up, I feel like that is perfectly fine too. The more you wear them, the more that the smell will start coming out of it. So which vintage fabrics are the best to pick? There is so many of them, but one of my favorites that if I can find it, it is something I'm definitely going to purchase is Poplin. I love a cotton poplin to begin with. I often buy it instead of buying a cream muslin fabric because in the end, I know that I will have a wearable test. So this poplin is something that I'm always looking for. I love to find it in cotton. It's breathable and it has a very tight weave, but it's thinner than quilting cotton. It also is described as crisp. And I've also noticed that it doesn't wrinkle nearly as much as if I did a regular cotton or linen. I know all of us would love to be draped in linen every day, all day, but after 5 minutes in it and I'm completely wrinkled, it's really hard for me. And so I realized that poplin is perfect. But the problem with poplin is it has a little bit of a sheerness, especially in white. So I'm going to show you some ways to get over that. I'm also going to show you some ways to handle these vintage fabrics because sometimes they can be a little crisp and if you don't pick the right needles or the right threads, you can leave little holes in them that can make them more vulnerable to tears later. So let's talk about this Zara Square Neck top. This is a pattern that I have not sewed up before. I'm so excited that I did. I love these little sleeves. I'm going to show you all the details. Let's get started.
I think this Zara Square Neck top is going to be the perfect match for this embossed cotton fabric. Now this fabric's been sitting in my stash for about 2 years, so there's no scent to it. But let's say you have a fabric that can't be washed. You can put it in a Ziploc bag with some baking soda and let it sit for a couple days and then just shake it off and use it just like normal. And this works for fabric that's not even musty, just has an odd scent. Now with these darts, oftentimes I use chalk, but with this fabric being so light and delicate, I didn't want to get the chalk stuck in the seams and have a stain. So I used a pen in order to do this, and this pen is so nice. It gets the lines perfect. So I think I'm going to be switching to this from now on. And I also got a little thinner roller in order to help. Now with these little diamond shaped darts, you want to make sure you do each side individually so you get nice marks to know where to turn your sewing machine. Now this marker works so well. I normally do it on the inside, so right side's facing down, but I did it on the right sides, and as I ironed, it actually darkened those lines, so I was able to see how to line them up on the right side of the fabric, and then once I ironed them, I could see where I needed to sew on the inside of the fabric. Darts are really easy to do. You just want to make sure you don't add any puckering. So with your threads long to begin with these diamond darts, you're not going to back stitch, and you're just going to sew right on the line and then come off of the fabric. And with this, then all you have to do is just tie it off. I'll show that in just a minute, but I'm going to show how to do all these darts really quick. And these darts on the side is just to help get rid of any bulging fabric. They don't need to come to the apex. None of these darts need to come to the apex. So that makes it a lot easier. And here I'm just going to be tying off the darts. You don't want to pull too tightly because that will add a pucker, so you want them to be sitting nicely. I give about 3 knots to make sure they're going to hold before I cut any of the ties. So again, on all of these darts, you want to be very gentle to not pull too tightly. And the darts, I think, gives this crisp fabric such a nice look because it's kind of like a men's shirting fabric where it's just going to be nice and crisp here. And then you're going to take, I love this ironing ham. It's just perfect for these darts because darts create shape. And the ironing ham has that shape built in so you can iron the darts the direction that you would like them. Now, I'm going to be cutting out the back really fast here as well as the puff sleeves. I'm doing the short sleeves, and then I'm going to be cutting out this interfacing. Now, this fabric is so thin. I don't want to put a really thick interfacing here because you're definitely going to be seeing this. And so I have this really nice sheer interface that I love to use on some of these nicer fabrics. And then I'm going to be working on the binding. So I'm getting everything prepped so I'm ready to go once it's time to start putting everything together. And the binding, you're just going to iron in half, and then you're going to bring in both of those sides to meet in the center. I do have some of those binding making tools, but I honestly like to just make it with my iron most of the time. Now here's that interfacing, and I'm going to be serging all the way around just to make sure that this is complete too. So we're just getting everything ready so the interfacing is nice and ironed. And I like to cut the interfacing with the fabric as you saw before, just to make sure everything lines up. So here we have the darts completed. We have everything serged as well as the binding, and the interfacing is all done. And then we're going to be moving on to finishing up the center seam here. And the seam allowance on this pattern is 3/8, and I think that's a perfect seam allowance. Sometimes when it's a 1/2 inch, it can get kind of tricky on curves and it can feel pretty far away with your presser foot, and so this 3/8, I just really like it. And then it's time to add the back of the shirt to the front of the shirt. So you want to make sure you have right sides together. And then I just like to clip everything together. So we're going to clip the sides as well as the shoulder seams. And then here's our facing. I'm going to also clip this together. So this way I can take both of these pieces to my sewing machine and quickly get them done. So here I'm sewing down the facing as well as the shoulder seams. And you can leave the shoulder seams done and not do the side seams here just to give you an open view of the facing. But I just decided to do everything together. Now with the facing, you want to iron them open as well as those seams as well as the shoulder seams. And we're just going to clip those together and make sure that everything is lining up and then sew them. Now after I have them sewed, I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to clip on the inside of those corners before I turn the interfacing inside out. Now this is the part that I think is really important. I know facing can get annoying because it kind of flaps up. So first I understitch this. So I'm stitching the extra fabric when I was sewing to the inside of that facing. And so that's going to hold it nice and tight. I even lifted up my presser foot just when I'm going around those edges because they're going to be open. And if you sew them closed, it's going to make that inner facing want to flip up more. So every time you come to where you cut with the scissors, back stitch, and then you're going to lift up your presser foot, no need to cut ties, and then you're going to move to the other side, and that will keep those right angles perfect and help keep that interfacing down. So that's the understitch right there. And then I like to make sure that it's secured down. So anywhere I have a seam, I'm going to be stitching in that seam all the way down the facing just to make sure that it holds. So in the back, it's nice and secure with that center seam. And then we did the exact same thing at both of the shoulders. This is just a great way for, I know a lot of us don't like facing because it just feels like it's flopping around, but this helps hold it in, and doing that mesh interfacing helps it not be this big bright white facing that's going to be showing. Now, when I'm doing gathers, I want to first measure where my seam needs to be. And with this vintage fabric, I'm not using a regular needle. I'm using actually a stretch needle, so it's a little thinner because it does just punch holes. And I'm going on that seam allowance. So the binding is 3/4 of an inch, so I'm sewing on that. And then I'm just going to gather with the bobbin thread. But as you can see, my gathers are really nice and tight, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But then I iron the gathers forward. This helps prevent the tucks or any holes. And so you're going to iron it down flat first, and then you can add it onto your binding with everything still opened. And then just stitch, and this is on the right side of the fabric because I want that crisp edge on the right side. So I'm going to be just stitching in that iron line of my binding, and this will help add that crispness. So instead of just sewing at the bottom or serging at the bottom, you want to actually have a stitch right in that iron line. Now right here we're going to be closing up not only the binding, but we're going to be closing up the side seams of the sleeve before we top stitch that binding on. So that's going to hide any of those stitches. So you just want to iron it flat, and then you're going to fold over that binding over the gather stitch. And so that's the inside of the fabric where it's folded down. And then on the right side of the fabric, you can see how it's stitched. And then you're just going to take it back through your sewing machine. I like to make sure that the front or the right side of the fabric is the fabric that I'm sewing on. So you can see it right here that I'm sewing that 1/8 stitch right along the front of this sleeve, and it's going to catch the back of the binding and hold that tightly as well. But I know the front is going to look absolutely perfect because they're kind of blind stitching that inside. So the front is really where we're the most concerned. And then here we're going to be adding another gather stitch. Now, like I was saying before, this fabric, it goes really well with smaller gathers. So this is actually just a 2.4 regular stitch that I'm stitching here. And I did back stitch on these smaller projects just so I have a place where it's going to stop as I add those gathers. So here you can see the gather stitch is just 2.4, and it's just a regular straight stitch. And then just with pulling that bobbin makes these beautiful tight little gathers. And then again, you're going to iron those gathers down, and this actually locks in the gathers. So it's a lot easier to make sure that the gathers aren't moving underneath your sewing presser foot, because sometimes that happens with the pressure. It'll start moving those gathers all the way up instead of just going over them. So if you iron them, it locks it right in. And then you're just going to be clipping everything around the armhole, or often referred to as the arm side. Now the reason why I add the gather stitch on the seam allowance is because now I can just stitch on top of that stitch again, and it's going to be those perfect gathers with no tucks instead of doing 2 lines of gather stitches. And then again, with all wovens, you want to make sure that you serge those edges just so they don't unravel, and you want to have a nice finished details in the inside. And then with this shirt, once I tried it on, I wanted it a little bit longer. I didn't want it all the way to the longest setting, so I just did a rolled hem here and just tucking in the serge, and this is it completed. So those little details on the fabric look so beautiful, and the delicate gathers of the sleeve I am just in love with. You can see how using that mesh interfacing made it not this bright white line, but it actually blends pretty well. And then the darts give it such a lovely shape. I love how this top actually fits my shoulders. That's usually one thing that is really hard for me to fit.
I love how the Zara top turned out in the poplin. It's so nice and crisp. I can dress it up or dress it down. It is perfect. I can layer it. So many options with this. So while we're talking about vintage, I want to show you some other vintage items I have in my sewing room. I inherited these from my husband's grandparents, and I feel so blessed. So one of my favorite things to look at are these wooden threads. Like, I cannot believe that they used to put it on wood. Look at that. They even have the little notch that is cut into it so the thread doesn't unwind. I love these. These were stored so well that if I'm in a pinch, I often use them in like cotton fabrics. They're holding up so well. I just love it. I also have, these are usually a biscuit tin or shortbread cookie tin. Mine that I inherited is a date tin for Coachella dates, and it's the buttons. I look at these all the time. I spend too much time looking at these. I think me and my kids and my husband spent hours when we first inherited them just looking at the buttons that they kept. I also have a sock darner, and this thing looks so used, and I'm hoping that next time we get a hole in the sock, we use it. I still haven't. It's been a couple years, and I still have not got to use a sock darner. And some of the packaging is just gorgeous. Look at this. Looks like the 1960s to me. If you know the date, please put it in the comments. I would love to know. I have so many needles like this. I also use a lot of vintage binding that I inherited as well. These are so much fun. Just the packaging. I just love it. 30 cents for thread. And this one has a plastic. Oh, what found this interesting is it's for buttons and carpet. So I hope you guys, if you have a chance to inherit any fabric, definitely go for it. Also, with the darts, if you are a little bit scared to use chalk like I am with the white fabric, definitely pick yourself up one of these disappearing inks. I like the air and water soluble instead of the friction. Once you add heat to the friction, your lines are going to disappear. Whereas with this, if you give it enough time, the air will help disappear the ink as well if you don't spray it with water. So let's move on from vintage and let's talk about this chiffon fabric. Originally, it would be made out of silk, but now it's either made out of rayon or it's made out of polyester. But with any fabric, this fabric can be a little delicate when you're starting to work with it. But then once you get it sewed up, it's beautiful. It has such a great drape, but it needs to be lined. If you go outside in a sunny day with this fabric on, it is like the emperor's new clothes, which I guess is in style. But it's definitely not a style that I want. So this is what I felt would be perfect for the new bubble skirt with Ellie and Mac. Not only does this have a gorgeous drape to it, it also has that bubble hem where it comes up, because hemming this type of fabric can also be a nightmare. So let me show you how to handle this fabric, work with it, and come out with a beautiful summer skirt.
I love this fabric and a pattern. It is just so beautiful. And here I'm going to be cutting it at the knee length. There's an ankle length as well as a short length. And then here's actually just black poplin that I have that I'm going to be cutting for the liner of the skirt. So the liner of the skirt is shorter than the outside of the skirt and it's not as wide. So you actually gather it on and that's what gives you the bubble. Now I have my fabric on fold here. I'm going to cut one waistband and then I'm going to be cutting another waistband. So I have two here for the actual waistband, and then I'm going to be cutting two for the actual ties. And here I just want to add an inch to it, just so it's a little bit longer, but I don't want like a huge bow here. I just want a simple tie that will help me adjust, because when I'm on vacation, I walk a ton. And so by the end, or if you wear this a couple days, the elastic might not be as tight as you need it. So having the extra ties is great. And then you're just going to serge up all those loose ends, because this fabric is so delicate. You want to make sure that it doesn't fray. It's the same thing with the black poplin. You can see here, just rubbing my fingers on it just takes out that weave. So you just want to make sure that you have everything serged. And then you don't need to have the tension high on this. Just remember, it's almost like keeping it like it's a knit. So I even have a wider stitch here, and you can see my tension is low, but just sewing it by itself at a 3.5, you can see is already creating a gather. So you can imagine that if you were to crank up your tension here and then elongate your stitch to a 5, your fabric is going to shrink so much that you're not going to have enough threads to make the gather correctly. So I definitely suggest hand gathering here as I'm completing the bottom of this bubble skirt. Because again, this does not need a huge gather. It's probably about 1.5 to 1 with the actual lining of the skirt. So it's not this crazy flowy gathered skirt. Now, once you have the bottom of your skirt done, we're going to start working on, look how cute, that looks so cute. I'm just so excited about this. We're going to start working on that waistband. So here's my 2 waistbands, and I already have them ironed in half. And the first one, I'm just going to be sewing around the edges, but I'm going to keep one side open. So I'm going to be sewing around that long edge and then one short edge. And this is going to create the ties. So once I have that all nice and sewed down, you can turn it out and top stitch it just like I have here. So this is me turning it out with one of those tools to turn it. And this one, when I can find it, is so helpful. Oh my goodness, I love it. Once I have both sides completed, I'm just going to clip it on to the waistband that's ironed in half. So you want to get it as close to that iron mark as possible, because these have the exact same seam allowance. So once I have those basted on, now I can be putting the right sides of my waistband together. So when I ironed it, I had wrong sides together, so the right sides was facing out. And then I just sew it together and iron it flat like a normal waistband. And you can see the ties right here. And then I'm going to be putting this chiffon onto the poplin with the waist, and I'm just going to clip it all the way around. Now this chiffon fabric, it can just slide out from under your fabric so easy, and so you don't want to spend all this time with the waistband trying to make sure that it's not sliding, or find out later that you have a hole in it. So basting right here, or just doing a regular, like I would say about a 3.5 stitch is where I have this right here. You just line up the chiffon with your lining fabric, and you just make sure that it sews together. You don't need to have this at the 3/8. You can do it a little bit more on the inside, but just this will save you so much heartache. Now this pattern does come with pockets, but as you can see, the delicate nature of this fabric, you do not want to add the pockets, because they're not going to be strong enough to actually hold anything in them. And so you just want to do straight seams here. If I was doing a cotton fabric all the way, I would be adding the pockets, but with this type of fabric, it is just so delicate, it's just not worth the risk. And then once I have that all basted in, I can add on the waistband and then sew it on with a straight stitch, leaving an opening for the elastic. I used about a 1.5 inch elastic here because I wanted it pretty tight in the casing. I like to have my elastic as tight as possible. And then you're just going to close the elastic in a box with an X, and then finish up the opening and make sure that you have everything perfectly stretched with this elastic, because I want to secure this in. There is nothing worse than having your elastic roll, especially when you're on vacation. And so I did a 1/4 inch top stitching here just so I can make sure that the elastic was secured next to the waistband and prevent any future rolling. And this gives it such a cute little detail. I love it because it has this cute little gather in the back, but the ties cover up the gathers in the front like you can see here. I have this still with a Zara Square Neck, but I could wear this with a t-shirt, a jean jacket. There's so many ways to wear this adorable skirt and have it nice and breathy. You can dress it up for dinner, or you can easily wear it with tennis shoes and a jacket while you're walking around shopping and still feel like you're getting air.
So when I first saw the Sadie skirt, I was kind of wondering what in my closet I would make with it because it can either be really nice and fancy, but I wanted something more of a day wear. And picking a chiffon fabric seemed like the complete opposite of what I would want. But it turned out perfectly. And it's also going to be nice and breathable if you're going on a warmer vacation. This chiffon fabric, I absolutely love it. But you need to make sure that you either have a slip with it or you have a lining, and this solves all the problems and it's nice and breathable. Not to mention, chiffon fabric is not one that's going to get overly wrinkled. Bringing woven fabrics on vacation can seem absolutely crazy, but luckily they have invented this spray wrinkle release that you can buy in travel size. I love it. So spray down whatever clothes you have and you can kind of stretch it out, and then you can put it inside your bathroom while you're taking a hot shower, and the steam will help release the poplin and the chiffon, and you'll be ready to go once you're unpacked. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it so much. I hope you had fun learning about these different fabrics and you how to treat those vintage fabrics. Thank you again for watching. A like and subscribe would be amazing. Happy sewing. Catch you next time.